I have a pretty basic data set here where I have some dates, names, that is salespeople, quantity of sales and price of sales, and then the total is just the quantity times price. And each person can have multiple sales in one day, which is what's going to be a bit tricky about this. I want to do multiple pages in my Power BI report where I both sum for each day to see how much did that person sell for on that day. And I also want to see for each day what person made the biggest total sales. And I also want to see if I select multiple dates, then who was the biggest salesperson for those multiple days. I've loaded the data into Power BI and I haven't added that extra column because it's a calculated column. I want to create a measure that does it instead. And anytime we work with dates, I need to add a calendar table. I'll simply use calendar auto because I'm lazy and it does everything I need to. Except I want this to be a date and not a date time. And of course this will be Danish. But first I need to make sure I make a connection between these two tables. And then I need to mark the calendar table as a calendar table. Yeah, mark as date table. And that is based on the date column. So that's fine. And then this changes. Then I can go back and create the basic pivot table where I need to make sure I grab the date from the calendar. And that doesn't look right because this is a date hierarchy. So I want this to be a date hierarchy. And I of course forgot that I need to actually add all of this myself because the calendar auto function only gives me the one column. So I'll go back and do that again. I've added my extra columns, which is simply the month name and then the month number using the month function. And I need to make sure to sort my month name by my month number because otherwise it'll sort it alphabetically. Then I've added year, day, weekday, and I'm using 2, which means that 1 is Monday and 7 is Sunday. And then I've made a weekend column, not that I'll need it for this data set, and I wanted to make that into a date. And then I already have a date hierarchy, which is fine. And then I can add this hierarchy, and I don't want quarters. But I do need a new measure, which is simply a sum. So I want to put that into the sales table. I'm not going to make a measure table right now because I don't think the data set is big enough to warrant that. So total sales is simply sum x over table. I named that sales, where I want to take the price and multiply that. So for each row, I'm multiplying the price with quantity, and then it's summing up the total. And then I can add that. And then I did something wrong. Yeah, because I now made a new calendar table. That means there's no connection between the two. And now there is a relationship. So now this is working. And I can then add salespeople to the mix because I don't actually care about this right now. I mean, it might be relevant, but I don't want that right now. I want that to be the name. And then I should sort by year and month and day. And I can then choose whether I want this to be a table or a matrix, which is what we're used to with pivot tables, where you have the little buttons on the side to expand. And then I don't want names as columns because that could, well, it depends on what you want. In my case, I'm going to do it like this. And then I should be able to press that button and that gives me everything. So now, of course, it just says 2023 January 1 and you need to then check, well, what month am I in? And that might be confusing when you're down at the bottom. And then I can add my slicer already because that's just the name column. I can add that underneath my table here. So this is just fine. And likewise, I can already add my date filter, which is also going to be just on the side here. But I don't want to have it the way it is right now, because right now, whenever you have the auto calendar, it's going to make way more data than you need. This is all the data for every single day. So you can see 365 rows, and I don't have sales for 365 days. I want to make a measure that I can use in order to only show not every single day, but only the days where I actually have a sale. So right now, again, I have way too many days. So I'm going to add that again, and then I want to make a measure. And I simply want to say, well, is the current day that I'm looking at inside the calendar table, can that be found within all the unique values of dates in the sales table, which is then going to be date in sales dates, which is simply an if, and then I'm using max to simply grab a scalar value, which would then be the calendar date. So this is simply to grab a single value. I want to say, is this, so the current day that I'm looking at, the 1st of January, 2nd of January, and so on, can that be found within the values of my sales tables date column? And if I can, I want to return 1, otherwise 0. And I need to make this 1 and 0 because those are numbers. And when I then add this, I will get ones and zeros, and I can then just filter it to say I only want those with a 1, which gives me the 6 days. And that's exactly what I want to put on this filter, if I can remember what I called it. I need to make sure that the if statement gives ones and zeros, because then here in filter, I can say is 1 and is 0, which means I now only have those 6 days where I actually have a sale, which makes a lot more sense when you look at it, because now you won't click on 7 and be confused why there isn't any sales, because you now know there weren't any. I want to make one more table on this introductory page, and to visualize the process, I'm going to make a new calculated table, because I think that makes it easier to understand, which is simply I want to summarize my sales table based on the names of people, and I then want to add a new column to that. But let's just start out with this. I'll only get 3 values, and then I can add a column to that. And actually I also want to summarize based on the date, because that will make a lot more sense. I want 1 row for each person for each day. Well, there might be days where they didn't make a sale. She only has 5 rows because there was a day she didn't sell, the 4th of January. And then upon this table, I want to add a new column. And then there's the trick with add columns, which was where it's an iterator. So I either need to wrap my new column in a calculate, or I can use a measure, and I conveniently have exactly the measure I want, meaning I can just reference total sales, then it'll work. So again, this whole table is simply for illustration purposes, because this is what I want to end up with. And then I want to say, well, for each day, what person had the biggest sale, which for the 1st of January is going to be Asa, and she had a sale of 60. So I want to show only that row in my table. And I can already add the date hierarchy and then add a measure afterwards. And again, I can actually add this filter. So date in sales date was what I called it. And I then actually need to use this calculated table that I made, but because it's just for illustration purposes, I want to eventually delete this, so I don't want to reference it, even though I'll need it twice. So first I need to get the salesperson who made the biggest sale. And actually it's easier to start out with not the person, but just the value, because this is just a max X. So I want to make a variable of my grouped table, which was then the summarize. And here I don't care about the day, because I'll get the day from my filter context from my table. So I only need to summarize on person, which was called name. And then upon this table, I need to use add columns. And I want to add again a total sales column using the total sales measure. And then I want to return. And then upon this table, which has again been filtered based on the day, because that comes from my visualization, I then want to say, grab me the max from the group table. And then I simply want to grab the total sales. And this simply grabs me the value, which we can confirm is correct by going in here to the temp table and say, well, that was 60 on January 1st. And on the 2nd of January, it should be 36, which it is. So the first part works just fine. But to grab the person, I need to do a little bit more, because I can't just grab the value. I need to do sort of a lookup. My first part is just fine, which again is filtered on the day level based on my visualization. But I need to do more. I only want to grab 1 row, which I do with max, but I don't want to grab a single value. I need to grab the whole row. So what I can do is then say a new variable called top sale, which uses the top end function. And I want the first row from my group table, and I want that in descending. And actually that should be based on the total sales column, and that should be descending. So I get the largest value, and then I only return 1 row. And then I may as well do that as a variable also, and then say salesperson, where I want to select columns. I can then say specifically I want the salesperson column. So I'm acting upon my top sale measure, which is then a table, and I want to grab top seller name, which is just what I'm going to call the column. And my expression is then, well, I want to grab the name from this, and then I can just return salesperson, which is everything I expected it to be. Asa Denji, because that was the 1 day where Asa wasn't doing any sales. So Asa is a very good salesperson apparently. And the trick here is that salesperson, because it's only returning 1 row in top sale, and here salesperson is only returning 1 column, I get a table which is 1 row and 1 column, which I can try visualizing. And of course I don't have my filter context, but if I just try doing this, I will get then the top 1 salesperson in total. And DAX is smart enough to understand that because this is a 1 column, 1 row table, it will spit that out as a scalar value, which is very convenient for me, because otherwise I'd have to do some other trickery. And then I can delete that, and I can also delete the other temp table. And that was everything I wanted on the first page. So now I can just say, well, I only want to look on the third day. What is then the sum of sales for each salesperson on that day? And then who made the biggest sales? And of course, if I then say Denji, all rows here are going to return his biggest sales, which then means these two tables are the same. So it's kind of pointless. But it might be that these two work together. So I could go in and say, because it doesn't make sense to filter salesperson on this table, unless you wanted to filter on multiple. So both Denji and Kobeni, we could then see that there were 2 days she was the biggest salesperson. So I do actually want to keep the connection between these two tables. Well, between this slice and this table. But if I didn't want to, I could say under edit interactions, under format, I could say that these two shouldn't work on each other. So now when I add a filter, it only filters this table. And likewise, I could do the same here, but I don't want to do that. I do want them to filter because, again, if I want to compare 2 salespeople, this would make sense. For page 2, I simply want to look at the top performer, and I can simply grab some of my measures I've already made, because they'll then be filtered on nothing, because I don't have any page filters. So I can turn this into a card and say that is then the max sale per day, which isn't correct in this case. It's not actually max sales per day. It would be the sum of the biggest sales per day, which might be a bit tricky to think of. At least I think it is, but it's what you get here in this column when you sum up only the biggest sales. And what I want to see is, well, then how much does the one biggest sale for each day, how much does that contribute to the total amount of sales? So if I bring out total sales and have that on the side, then that should also be changed to be sum of all sales and not just sum of the biggest sales. And then I also wanted the maximum salesperson, and then, no, not that one, this one. And because there's no filter on dates, it's simply taking the sum of all sales for each person. So here it would be ASA 60 plus 36 plus 66 and so on. And then it will say which of the 3 salespeople is then the top performer. Because I'm not adding in the filter and I'm not in this summarize, I'm not doing anything with dates. So it's simply saying that ASA is the person who's made the biggest sales. And then I want one more thing, which is then to say sum of biggest sales per day divided by sum of all sales. So I can see how much does the biggest sale contribute, which is then just divide. And now it's not happy probably because of that apostrophe. I want to divide the max sales per day with the total sales. And then that will be a percentage, which means I then need to go into the measure and say that is a percent. And I don't need any decimal points. What it all means is just that if you only take the biggest sales for each day, they contribute a bit over half of everything. So if I had multiple salespeople, I might want to say, well, if I take the top 3 sales per person per each day, how much of the total sales comes from those top 3? So that might make sense if I have 10 people or 20. For page 3, I want you to be able to have a filter with the days and never quarters. And likewise, I also want that measure to be used as a filter. So I don't have all of these extra days that I don't have any values for. And what I want is to then say, I'll be able to select one or all days. And I want to see, well, what was the biggest sale within the selected days and who was the biggest salesperson. So the same thing I did here, but I want it on a bigger scale. And I can't simply use these measures I've already made, because right now this is set up to include all days, and I don't want to include all days. I don't want to sum the biggest sale on each day. I want to select the one biggest sale on the one day, which means I need a mildly different calculation called the biggest sale, which will then be max X because I'm iterating over a table. And that table is then, to summarize once again, the sales table. And I want that based on salesperson names and also on date. And I'm adding a column to this, which means I need to remember to use add columns. And then upon this summarized table, I want to add sum of sales, which is then the measure, which means I don't have to wrap it and calculate. Well, what expression am I using max X? Well, that will be the total sales. And then I can add this, and that will be a card instead. So 72, well, then I should make sure to make that into money. If I have all dates selected, well, then the one day that I had the biggest sale is 72, and I can go and check that. Well, actually I can't because I don't have that extra column, but I could go back to page 1 and say that seems to be correct. That is January 6th, 72. And actually I might want to add that as well in order to test that this max sales per person measure also works here. In this context, I want to go back and manipulate my data. where I can then say, in this case, I want to make sure that Kobeni has a day where she made the biggest sales. And conveniently, she's the only person who sold 10 of something. So I can just go in and say, well, I want to replace values. I want to replace 10, which means 10 times 4 is 40. And I need to beat 60, so I can turn this into 17. So that should be 17. And then when I close and apply, then she will be, Kobeni will now be the biggest salesperson on day 1. And she's also the overall biggest salesperson, which means that this measure will not work for what I want to do. So I need to go back and likewise repeat this measure now for the new context. But I want to add the date first, which is then going to be the same principle as before, so almost the same syntax as this, but instead of max, I need to use top n to get the one row, and then I use select columns to extract the date, and then I can repeat that also for the salesperson. So almost this same syntax, which means I can just copy this part. And then I can say biggest sale day, which was this part. So add columns to summarize table, summarize sales, and then I want to say top n, and that's 1, and then it's being annoying to me. So I want to summarize sales based on name and date and add this total sales column. And then I want to find the biggest row based on this, but that's not everything. I also want to then say select columns and say that upon this top n, I want to select the column and I will call that date. And then I want to extract the date, which is here. And then if I did everything right, then this will work. And it should then be the 1st of January because that's the day where Kobeni sold 72 and then it can't display. And what ended up happening is that I actually have 2 days where I have the exact same max sale of 72 on the 1st of January and the 6th of January. It means I here have a problem. Yeah, a table of multiple values was supplied where a single value was expected, which probably wouldn't happen in real life because that would be very unlikely. What I can then say is, well, in case of duplicates, I could say ConcatenateX because this is then a table. So my expression is then going to be my sales date, which is then called date. And here is also date. So maybe I should call this date temp because that might make a bit more sense. Because now I have too many columns called date. Then I can say my concatenator or my delimiter should be comma space. And then this is fine. Now I get 2 values. So those were the 2 days I had the biggest sale. And then of course I'll have to repeat this. So actually it was a bit fortunate that this happened because I'll need the concatenate also, because I now have 2 days with the same max sales. This will be the biggest sale days, and then the biggest sale is 1 value, and in case of duplicates, it doesn't matter because it grabs the max, which is just 1. And I wanted to repeat that, but for person instead. Again, a new measure, and then I can copy paste that. So that will be person instead of day, and then I want to still do this and sum of sales, but not date temp. I want to be person. Would then also be name, and then this should be person temp. So now this should be Asa and Kobeni once I add it as an actual card. So these were the 2 people that had the biggest sales, and these were the 2 days they happened, and then the biggest sale here. And of course, if you then add filters, you'll see, well, I'm only getting 1 here, which is what I expect because Kobeni had the biggest sale on January 1st, and this is American, so this needs to be proper. Yeah, because it thinks it is text, so I can't just go up here and say date. I'd need to add formatting to each value within this table, and I'm not sure I can add format. I just want to test it. So I could say here, I want that to be format, and it needs to be within those parentheses. Need another parentheses. So this is why indentation is super important. Now it says 0301, which is what I want. And this is fine, and this is fine. So now I have everything I wanted to add. So yeah,